Alright guys, Tyler down here at Emerald City Guitars, and today we're back in the shop to look at a very, very special guitar that we got in and immediately sold. It is the absolute first 14 fret D-28 that was ever ordered from Martin, stamped March 8th of 1934. So you notice I said this is the first 14 fret D-28 ever made, and that's because from 1916 to 1933, Martin made an extremely limited number of dreadnought guitars with rosewood back and sides that we would maybe consider a D-28 today. Sometimes they're called the D2, other times they're called the Ditson 222. That was when it was built for Ditson, which was one of Martin's main retailers at the time. So again, these were made in extremely limited numbers. They're by special order only, and thus, in that 17-year period between 1916 and 1933, there were only 28 of these rosewood dreadnoughts ever made. It's also worth noting that the vast majority of these 28 early guitars were built prior to the advent of steel strings, so a lot of them were braced differently and just wouldn't really resemble a modern D-28 as we know it. It's actually funny, in 1924, Martin almost completely dropped the dreadnought design altogether for lack of popularity, basically. The big dreadnought body just did not work with gut strings, but luckily by the end of the 20s, as steel strings were kind of coming to the fore, some people started to notice that, hey, this big body design could really work in this new era of steel strings. So another trend that was kind of coming to the forefront at the same time was the idea of having a 14 fret neck. So as the banjo craze of the early 20th century was kind of coming to a close, there were a lot of banjo players that were looking for an alternative with the flat top guitar. Now most of these guys preferred a longer neck, or at least the feel of a longer neck that they get with the banjo, which is why they're drawn towards this 14 fret neck design. Now, Martin first attempted to fill this need with the OM, which was of course designed in 1929, soon followed by some single O's and double O's, the plainer designs, the 17s and 18s, Martin would start making with this 14 fret neck. So while the 14 fret neck was starting to be used with other models, Martin did hold out on the dreadnought for quite a long time. I think it was because they were still ordered in very, very limited numbers. It didn't really justify completely redesigning the instrument. And that was the case until February of 1934, when Martin decided to build a prototype of a D-28 and send it to Chicago Music. So this was a very rare thing for Martin to do, to build a prototype and then send it out. But that's what they did, and the response must have been very positive, because only a week after they received the guitar, the first order was put in for the first batch of D-28s ever made with 14 fret neck. It was stamped on March 8th of 1934. There's a batch of 3 instruments, like I said, and this is the first of those 3, serial number 55676. So this first batch of 3 was sold and shipped to Coast Wholesale Music in San Francisco at the time. This guitar was kept in the store's inventory until December 27th of that same year, 1934, until it was shipped back to Martin, citing the need for some repair work. So Martin's repair shop notes indicate that the reason for the return was, and I quote, high action, raised top grain, and finally body marks. So the exact meaning of these notes and the work they dictated isn't exactly known, but the necessary repairs were completed, and the guitar was again shipped out on February 19th of 1935, this time to Lyon & Healy in Chicago. After spending several months at Lyon & Healy, though, the guitar was again sent back to Martin on July 30th, this time for reasons that we don't know. So this is where things get kind of tricky on going through the repair history of the guitar. There are no extant Martin repair records from the years 1936 to 1966. So all we can do really is make some inferences based on the clues that we see here, and there are a lot of clues. Now the first thing we see here is this fretboard has been replaced by a modern T-fret equivalent. Of course, being a March of 1934 guitar, it would have come original with bar frets. Now these square and diamond inlays, they do look really good. They might be original. However, it's such a simple, easy part to reproduce, it's very possible that they were just replaced along with the fretboard, although the neck does retain its original ebony reinforcement rod on the inside, so that's good. So here's the big one. The top on this guitar is not original. It's very likely a Martin factory top from sometime in the mid to late 1950s. This top has a rear shifted Xbrace that's straight tapered, which of course indicates a post-war build. But the apparent use of hide glue around the top joint would indicate that it happened pre-65, before Martin moved to their new factory and started using cold synthetic glues. The Xbrace would also change a little bit in shape and geometry in 1958, and the shape and geometry of this particular Xbrace indicates a build date prior to that. So the shape and the taper of braces varied very, very subtly and very slightly during those years, but even though the changes were slight, I could estimate this guitar as being retopped somewhere between 1954 and 1957. So the guitar does actually have the original pickguard from 1934. That's very surprising. This was not standard practice for Martin when doing a retop at the time. They would just take the guard off and put a whatever the modern day equivalent was. But the only thing I can imagine is that the repair staff who was doing this work maybe realized that it was a very, very, very early example and did what they could to keep it as original as possible. So also the kerf lining, where the top meets the sides, also appears to be original. There is evidence of replaced sections where the original Xbrace would have been tucked under the lining. The original forward shifted Xbrace has a very distinct geometry, and that distinct geometry is reflected in those missing sections of lining. So the guitar also has a number of modern repairs that we don't think were executed by Martin. All kinds of crack repairs all over, binding repairs. The guitar has been refinished at least once, more likely multiple times. The bridge is a very obvious replacement, a little bit oversized, about 50 thousandths in each dimension. The thing is far from being in mint condition, but still, I mean, it's undoubtedly a museum piece. So the Rosewood Dreadnought is the most iconic guitar of all time. I mean, every record you've ever heard features one. Every guitar company out there has made some version of it. There are millions and millions and millions of them out there, and this is the first one ever ordered. Now, calling a vintage guitar a piece of history has kind of been beaten to death, but I think in this case, it's very, very appropriate. So like I said earlier, this guitar came in and was sold immediately, but we couldn't let it go without doing a really cool video showcasing this amazing, amazing guitar. So I do have to say a quick thanks to Greg Hutton, the noted Martin historian. He was extremely, extremely kind and generous with his time. As far as all the information with the repair records, I never could have found any of that without him. So thank you, Greg, very much. He actually just put out a new book, Hutton's Guide to Martin Guitars, a fantastic, a Bible basically, about vintage Martin guitars. So if you're into this, you'll be into that. So this is one of the many really amazing vintage Martin guitars that we have in our shop right now. And we're getting more every day, pretty much, on a very regular basis. So if you're into this kind of thing, make sure to come down and check some of those out. If not, keep an eye on our website, or keep an eye on our YouTube channel for more cool videos and more demos like this.